The official narrative is designed for public consumption. It focuses on kinetic threats. Defense News confirms Lockheed is set to triple interceptor missile production. This is the visible, marketable dimension of force projection. It is also a systemic misdirection. The mathematical reality is that an adversary's most rational vector of attack is not kinetic. It is silent. It targets the central nervous system of the global financial and military architecture. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS assess the primary liability is not what flies, but what lies on the ocean floor. The Pentagon's doctrine of information dominance, evidenced by the constant deployment of assets like RC-135 spy planes over every strategic theater, has created a fatal dependency. This omniscience is not a strength. It is a single point of failure. The objective is not to defeat the American arsenal. It is to blind it. A coordinated attack on subsea data conduits and satellite uplinks creates a systemic solvency crisis in milliseconds. But militarily, it creates something far more volatile. A blind Leviathan. A system with unparalleled kinetic power, suddenly without sensory input, defaulting to automated launch-on-warning protocols. This is the blueprint for accidental escalation. The motive is not conquest. It is solvency. When a nation-state initiates a kinetic operation that becomes an unpopular draining conflict, it ceases to be a war for territory. It transforms into a domestic liability. The primary objective pivots from battlefield victory to regime survival. CSIS analysis confirms this vector. For a regime like Russia's, a protracted conventional war against a technologically superior Western-backed opponent is a mathematical black hole. It creates a liquidity crisis, not just of capital, but of political will. Every dollar spent on a failed symmetric engagement is a withdrawal from domestic stability. This is the solvency trap. The overwhelming conventional force of the Pentagon, amplified by constant surveillance from assets like the RC-135, makes a symmetric victory impossible. The kinetic cost becomes existentially high. This weakness forces a pivot. When you cannot compete on the established board, you are forced to overturn it. This is not a tantrum. It is a calculated economic decision. The pivot to asymmetry is the only rational path. The deployment of a tactical nuclear weapon is not the blueprint for apocalypse. It is the final, non-negotiable lever to force de-escalation, a mechanism to impose an unbearable, unacceptable cost, liquidating the adversary's strategic advantage in a single, decisive action. The Pentagon's strategy has a fatal economic flaw. According to analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the kinetic cost exchange is terminally broken. A $5 million main battle tank can be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This isn't an anomaly. It is a systemic solvency crisis for conventional military structures. This phenomenon is termed the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting state-level lethal force has collapsed. When an adversary's multi-billion-dollar conventional arsenal can be rendered insolvent by cheap commercially available technology, they are not incentivized to surrender. They are mathematically forced to escalate to a domain where cost is irrelevant. The nuclear threshold. The regional instability you are being shown is not the source of the conflict. It is the symptom. While financial news cites reports like managing wealth through crisis and war from entities such as UBS, they are not merely observing chaos. They are pricing it. These volatile regions are systemic assets. They are gray zone proxy laboratories engineered for staging and attrition. The core accelerant is a Pentagon strategy of absolute conventional dominance. This is not theory. It is logged in procurement contracts. Defense News confirms Lockheed is set to triple production of interceptor missiles. This creates a defensive shield so dense it renders an adversary's conventional missile arsenal a non-factor, a sunk cost. Simultaneously, this shield is paired with total battlefield transparency. Open-source data documents U.S. Air Force RC-135 Rivet Joint Aircraft, tail number 64-14848, conducting intensive reconnaissance off the Venezuelan coast. This level of surveillance makes traditional military maneuvers impossible. It creates an existential liability for any state actor attempting to operate symmetrically. When a nation faces this combination of impenetrable defense and total surveillance, its conventional forces become insolvent. Their only rational move is to bypass the conventional battlefield entirely. The gray zones serve as the arena for this asymmetric response, a place to bleed resources and test doctrines below the threshold of open war. According to RUSI, this is the textbook response to conventional overmatch. This is not a path to surrender. The mathematical certainty, as outlined in CSIS wargaming scenarios, is that this strategy forces adversaries toward a launch-on-warning posture, not for a first strike, but as a last resort lever against total conventional annihilation. The blueprint ends with the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to create a forced de-escalation. The instability in these laboratories is the final warning before the system defaults to kinetic protocol. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy of aggression. It is a protocol of solvency. When an adversary confirms its conventional forces are a terminal liability against overwhelming U.S. kinetic power, as evidenced by Lockheed tripling interceptor missile production, it must guarantee its final leverage, the nuclear arsenal. Launch-on-warning is the mechanism for that guarantee. It is a pre-authorized directive to launch a full-scale retaliatory strike based on data indicating an incoming nuclear attack, before that attack has landed and decapitated the command structure. This protocol has a systemic flaw: its absolute dependence on the integrity of early warning systems. These systems, radars, satellites, signals intelligence, are the primary targets in modern warfare. An adversary does not need to fire a missile to trigger a launch sequence. They only need to create the illusion of one. This is the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack designed to blind radar and spoof satellite feeds creates an identical data signature to a decapitating first strike. The commander is now blind, with minutes to decide. The mathematical certainty is this: waiting for confirmation is a low-probability survival strategy. The U.S.'s documented global surveillance deploying assets like the RC-135 spy plane confirms for any adversary that their capabilities are being mapped for a potential first strike. In this engineered crisis, the doctrine forces the commander's hand. Is it a glitch, a cyber attack, or is it the real kinetic event? The protocol's logic is irrefutable. When faced with annihilation, the only rational response is to launch based on the warning. This isn't a human failure, it is the system functioning exactly as designed. The blueprint for asymmetric escalation does not begin with a kinetic strike. It begins with a calibration shot, a signal designed to test U.S. response protocols and establish new red lines. The overwhelming conventional force, evidenced by Lockheed's plan to triple interceptor missile production, has made this a mathematical certainty. When an adversary's arsenal is rendered obsolete and their every move is monitored as confirmed by persistent RC-135 surveillance flights, they are forced to shift vectors. The target is not military. The target, as analysts at CSIS note, is economic solvency. The calibration forecast. Within 12 months, anticipate a sustained, attribution-impossible cyber-physical event targeting a primary U.S. maritime logistics hub, the port of Los Angeles or Long Beach. The objective will not be a blackout, but a systemic degradation of container management and crane operation software, crippling throughput by 60% for a 72-hour window. It will be publicly framed as a catastrophic ransomware incident. The event is a message delivered at a calculated kinetic cost, designed to be deniable. The signal is irrefutable. Economic liquidity is now a liability, and surveillance overmatch is not a shield. This is not war. It is a solvency crisis, delivered as a proof of concept.